All right, we'll get started now. Thank you everyone for joining our health and safety webinar for what's new in our January 25 store release for health and safety. So we had our health and safety release a couple weeks back on January 30th. And so this webinar is going to cover all the exciting things that we released. So before we begin, I'd love to introduce myself. My name is Claire Russell, and I'm the outbound product manager for health and safety. I'm joined here today by Shayna, and he is one of our inbound product managers. We actually also have Jordan here. He's going to be monitoring our chat. So as we go through our presentation today, if you have any questions about the specific functionality that we're presenting on, we'll be happy to answer any of those questions. I do need to cover our safe harbor side. Even though we're going to be covering what we released in January, we might talk a little bit about roadmap or any future looking statements. So anything forward looking might be changed as we get closer to the actual release of those features. So it should be informational. And be sure to join us for our future events. So this is actually a part of our live on ServiceNow curated events. Every quarter we release we release a What's New webinar. And so using this link, you'll be able to see all of the live on ServiceNow events, even for other products. So if you do own other products, it's a great way to look at their event series. And one thing I also want to call out about health and safety events. So we have our What's New webinar, but later in this month, we'll have 2 additional webinars for actually implementing some of these features. So we'll have a webinar on implementing exposure management, as well as a webinar on implementing permit to work to really give a better understanding for kicking off your projects with these features. And then we have some housekeeping here today. So there is going to be a dedicated Q&A section after this presentation. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions throughout the session. I think there's a chat below and then also the Q&A. Put your questions in the chat if you want to just engage with us, or put your questions in Q&A. If you want to engage with us or just say comments, you can put those in the chat. But the Q&A keeps the questions organized, so we'll make sure we're not missing any questions. Also, feel free to introduce yourself when asking a question. We'd love to know who you are, and it just gives us a good way to know who's on our webinars. And then the session's going to be recorded. So if you do need to drop off, or you see something really exciting that we're presenting about and you want to share to your colleagues, these recordings are going to be shared on the ServiceNow community forum. So actually on our community page, we have a dedicated health and safety forum. Be sure to check out that forum so the recordings will live there, and you can share them to whomever. And then after the session, you'll be prompted to fill out a survey. We always appreciate your feedback. We host these quarterly, and we'll be having quite a bit of webinars this year. So we'd love to know where we're doing well and also what we can improve on. So now we'll get into the content for today's agenda. So first, we'll go through a summary of what's new in January, and then we'll actually start to get into the specific features that we released. So we're going to cover permit to work, and then we will go through exposure management, meeting management, and then any other additional features that I wanted to call out as key parts of our January release. So what did we release in January? Our January release had 3 major new features and enhancements. The first one being permit to work, and this is a new feature within the health and safety risk management plugin. So if you are already using risk management or are new to risk management, this will be version 5 on the store. And if you update this, you'll see the risk management and permit to work features. And the goal of this is actually to digitize the permit to work process. So with this, you'll be able to control real-time risks as employees conduct hazardous work, and streamline the speed at which work can be safely completed. So by digitizing the process, there will be more visibility on the permit to work process. You can have approvals for it. So we're really excited to show you what we've built for permit to work and also a demo on that. Next, we'll cover exposure management. And again, this is part of our health and safety risk management plugin. So this will be V5 of the plugin. and it is to manage employee exposures. So with this feature, you'll be able to proactively monitor health and safety risks and potential exposure sources. There's quite a bit here, so you'll be able to do exposure assessments, you'll be able to do measurements and monitoring the exposures, and also take action. So assigning out bulk tasks to employee groups. So for things like hearing tests or other types of monitoring to really mitigate the risk of exposures harming employee health. And then finally, we have our meeting management feature, and this is going to be a multi-release investment from the health and safety product team. So we have released our first part of meeting management. And this is going to be within the health and safety incident management plugin. And the goal of this is to track any type of safety meetings. So any type of daily stand-ups, toolbox talks, safety committee meetings. And the goal is to provide an easy to use experience to track and maintain safety records of those meetings that have occurred. A lot of regulations are around, tracking and the audibility of safety meetings. So we're excited for this feature. And then the last minor update that I wanted to cover is establishment hours. So this is going to be part of our health and safety incident management plugin, specifically within our establishment table. And if you are an OSHA using customer, you would have your establishments logged within there. And what we've done is enhance the framework there. So now per year, you can actually track periodic hours worked. So for example, if you wanted to track one specific week and the hours that are worked with that for that establishment, and it will actually sum up all those different periods into the year total for that establishment. So the goal of this is for enhanced reporting capabilities for those establishments. And we are really excited about this feature because this was actually given to us by a lot of our customers who are using our OSHA plugin, and we wanted to provide a better reporting experience for them. And for those of you that aren't as familiar with health and safety, and maybe you're joining us for the first time to start learning about health and safety, I wanted to quickly cover an overview of what is within the health and safety product. So from an overview perspective, we have 6 top-level applications or plugins. So if you go to our store, these are going to be those plugin names that you'll find. And within each of our plugins, we have features. So for risk management, we have our risk assessments, audits and inspections, safety registers, job safety analysis, and now in our latest release, we have permit to work and exposure management. Next, we have our health and safety incident management. Within that, we have incident management, so being able to track injuries, illnesses, incidents, observations, and near miss. We also have a dedicated OSHA plugin for generating OSHA 300, 301, and 300A reports. And we have report mapping, where you'll be able to generate PDF reports of really any table across ServiceNow, or across health and safety within ServiceNow. So if you have a specific regulatory report for maybe the UK for HSE, or if you have a specific internal report that needs to be filled out based on information collected in the incident, this is a flexible framework to generate those PDF reports. And then finally, we have our newest edition of meeting management, which we'll cover today. And then our other 4 applications, I'll quickly go through, our critical event management, contractor management, which we released both of those in November of last year, if you're curious to know more about them. And then we have our case management and our Now Assist plugin, which is our generative AI feature. So one thing I wanted to call out here is all of these plugins are things that we'll continue to enhance on and invest over the next year. So keep checking back for our What's New webinars to learn how we're enhancing all of our features. Okay, and with that, I'd love to kick off and pass over to Shayna for him to cover permit to work.
Great, thank you, Claire. Can I skip on to the next slide from here? Or yeah, perfect. So yeah, we're going to look at permit to work, and permit to work is a new feature that we've released that handles safety permits, also known as safe to work permits, and also known as what we see here, permit to work. The idea behind this is that you can control risk for your workers, whether they are employees or contractors that you have working on high risk activities that need permits to conduct those kinds of activities. So, for example, hot works or work at height, those kind of things. So we've provided a intake for requesting a permit to work from Employee Center, which we'll have a look at in a moment in a demo. And it will combine various different work types into the same permit request so that you're not requesting separate permits for your hot works and your electrical works and things like that. So it's adding as much convenience as is required and bringing all of your risk assessments and your related inspections. And also, if you have any related work orders or maintenance records that you need to have permits for, you can also associate those with your permit requests. So let's jump in. I think it's going to be easier for me to talk to the live demo. So I'll just share my screen real quick and we can get going. Okay, sorry about this. Okay, hopefully you guys can see my screen okay. So if we jump into the Employee Center and we go to the health and safety page, you'll see all of the health and safety topics like we see here. And we've added the request for permit to work to the safety menu here. So you can jump in, you can go straight to permit to work, or you can jump down here and you can go in and you can request a permit to work from the catalog item like we see here. So if I click on this, it will bring us directly to a new permit to work form. So I can start filling in these. We can also save these as drafts. So if I jump into my requests, I can jump in and have a look at one of the requests that I started earlier. So here's a partially filled in permit covering hotworks and covering confined space entry. So what the requester today wants to do, they want to do some welding inside a new gas storage tank. So obviously they've got hotworks is the welding part of it, and the confined space entry is to cover the work inside the storage tank. So as you add those two types to your type field, it will then at the bottom add the different sections as required. So you've got your hotworks details, and then you have your confined space entry details. So these work types are configurable, as we know that work types can vary a little bit or a lot depending on your company or your industry. So we've provided these fields out of the box, although you can configure these to your needs. And then we have all of the more general permit fields at the top. So things like the description, the urgency, and then you can associate it with a risk assessment because a risk assessment may be required to conduct the permit or to request the permit. And if you do associate a risk assessment, it's going to give you the risk ratings here based on whatever risk matrix is included on that attached risk assessment. Also job safety analysis, any inspections related, or any work tasks. So the work task field is where you may have a work order or a maintenance record or something like that, and you would associate it here. All of these can be previewed, so you can click each of these to preview the record and see all of the related items on your permit. We can obviously put in your start date and end time for the permit. So that permit may be extending across a day, maybe extending across a week. And then you can also define when you want your approvals in. So if this permit needs to be approved by a certain number of people, they need to approve by this date, and they'll get they can be configured a notification to be sent that these approvals need to be due or need to be received in order to issue the permit. All of the people that will be working on the permit, they can be added here. We can also put in their shift start and their shift end, so you can make sure you can keep track of who's starting and ending their work during the permit very easily. And you can add multiple people in there too. So once this permit has been filled in, for the sake of time, we won't fill everything in today, but I'll hit acknowledge. And this acknowledge checkbox means that we're acknowledging this message here. And for all of the requests and all of the approvals, there is a configurable acknowledgement message because we know that in your company to acknowledge or to sign off on a permit to work, you may have different acknowledgement messages that you want to make sure that the person is confirming or validating. So that is configurable. So let's submit this one. and then we'll jump into the workspace and see how the permit coordinator would work after we quickly have a look at the details page. So once you've submitted it, it will bring you to a details preview, and you can see all of the details of the permit that you've submitted, who you've requested the permit for, so who's going to be working on that high risk activity. We've got some of the work details here, so the hot works and the confined space entry. It's not putting values in there because I didn't fill out all of those fields. We also have the activity stream, and then we have checklists. So when you're doing this kind of high risk activity, you may have some pre-work checklist item that needs to be filled in before the work is done. So maybe you need to have a look around the area that you're working on to make sure it's safe. And then there may be some closure items. So it will give you those checklist items, and it will assign them to everybody who's been included on the list of people working on the permit. And these are also configurable. So out of the box, we have two examples, but you as a user of this system, or the person who's implementing, will be creating your own and predefining your own checklists for those types of work. Um, and then you have attachments. So if you needed to attach anything, they would all be there. So as the person who requested this permit, I'll be keeping an eye on this. And when it gets approved, this becomes my permit. And then I can jump in here and I can actually print out that permit. So if I needed to have this permit printed out on paper and have it displayed outside the tank that I'm doing the welding in, I can print the permit and I can put it up on display where I'm working. Okay, so let's have a look at the workspace. So if I refresh this, I should see the one that I just submitted. So this is the one that I submitted for the gas tank work. And as a permit coordinator, I can jump in here and I can, let's close this to give us a bit more space. I can review all of the information that's been added, and I can make sure everything is correct. I can also edit or change things if it's required as the coordinator. And then I can jump in and I can look at all the approvers. So the permit coordinator is a demo coordinator role that has been requested to approve this permit. But you can add and you can configure who are the approvers for the different permit types. So we might have a list of approvers for hotworks and a list of approvers for the confined space. And I can also check the status of the checklists. So that is basically what will happen from the point of view of a person who requests a safe work permit or a permit to work. And this is the view that we've just seen here for jumping in, approving, and issuing a permit to work. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'll pass it back to you, Claire.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. I'm going to steal the share and we are going to get into our next topic for exposures. So we're now going to cover our next feature, which is exposure management. And with exposure management, you'll be able to proactively manage health and safety risks. So first, be able to identify exposures, assign and monitor exposures by those similar groups. And we do have some out-of-the-box categories, but if your organization has different types of exposures that you're working with, you'll be able to configure those different exposure types. Next, you'll be able to automate the exposures. So being able to first set the thresholds of exposure. So what is an exposure? What is the level that determines that there needs to be action taken on, and be able to bulk assign those actions based on employee attributes. Then finally, it is going to be part of our complete health and safety tool. So being able to incorporate risk assessments. So as you're doing risk assessments, if you're identifying the risk of exposures, be able to associate those. And then also linking to, health and safety cases for the management of occupational health surveillance. So if more action needs to be taken from a case management perspective. So as Shana did, I'm actually going to go into a demo of our exposures because I think that shows a lot better than walking through some slides here. So what we're going to be looking at is our health and safety workspace here, and this is updated to our newest release, which is, again, January 30th. And if you log into your workspace here, First, what you'll see is that we have a new risk management icon. So as you can tell, we've released a lot of features within our health and safety risk management over the past few years, and all of them had their own icons. And so what we did was we actually bundled all of our risk management features into one icon. We wanted to provide the design experience so that as a user, if you had everything turned on in your instance, you weren't hovering over each of every single one of these icons being like, where is exposure hiding? We wanted to put it in, an easy to find area. So now we have JSAs, we have risk, we have permit to work, inspections and audits. And if we go all the way down here, we can see our exposure types. Now, first, what you'll do, and we'll walk through an example here, is you'll define your exposure types. And so we'll open up an existing one. But you would be able to create new exposure types. And so you can have these exposure types just be as general as a noise exposure, or you could be more granular with the categorization of these exposure types. So maybe you want to do it by locations. And again, these locations could be, they're pulling from the WSD location hierarchy. So it could be a city all the way to an individual space. Again, it depends how granular you want to be with your reporting and your categorization of these exposure types. Now from here, you'll see our exposure categories. We provide these 5 out of the box, but if you have different exposures that you're working with within your organization and your industrial hygienists are working with these, you'll be able to add to this list here. And then from our exposures too, you can associate a risk assessment. So if a risk assessment has been created based on this exposure type, perhaps a new machine was ordered, you did the risk assessment on that, you identified that there would be a risk of noise exposure, so you wanted to associate it here. And then also for anything that has chemicals, you can associate our safety register. From our related list here, we see our exposure assessments, and at the top, we can actually create an exposure assessment. So once you create your exposure assessment, you can choose the locations where this exposure is present. Again, this is going to be pulling from that WSD location hierarchy, so it will show all of the locations within that hierarchy. If you wanted to put some filters on this, you could. And so once you add a location, this is multi-select. So if we go this, and then we choose Americas, and you create these, what it's going to do is create an individual exposure record within this list view. So it will easily create multiple exposure assessments at once. Now, as we drill into this exposure assessment from Dublin, actually we'll open up this one, we'll see our exposure assessment. So from the exposure assessment, you then can start determining and assessing the risk of exposure. So what we're looking at here is a exposure, and at the bottom here, what I really want to call out are these condition builders. These are using the platform condition builders, and what they're going to do is be able to set conditions for what is an exposure. There are regulations, and depending on where you're at in the world for what is considered an exposure. For example, OSHA says that a noise exposure is 85 decibels over a time-weighted average of 8 hours. So if you wanted to put that in for your measurement, maybe it's greater than 85, maybe it's greater than 90. Again, it's depending on what you would like it to be flagged as an exposure. Now, this is really great how we've set this up, because if regulations change, if anything changes about what you would like to identify as an exposure, you can go in here and easily edit this number. Now, what this is pulling from is any of the fields that are within exposures. So if you wanted to set it on exposure management, maybe the measurement unit, maybe the time-weighted average, you're able to pull from that. And we have some other condition builders here. So there's logic saying, is it 0? Is it less than? Very flexible for how you would like that condition to be set. So we'll go here, set this. And then next we want to determine who's impacted by that exposure. And so with the condition builder, we can see that we have one person in here, but we can edit it to say, Maybe user is in a certain location, or user is working with a certain job, or user is working with a certain manager. These are, you're able to dot walk on them. You're able to scroll through this whole list and see the attributes. And this user information is pulling from the health and safety profile here. So for the purpose of this demo, I just have user is active, and in this instance, I have one employee, but you would actually be able to pull larger amounts of employees. So for your organization, instead of sitting down and saying, okay, I need to now pull a report of every single employee in this specific location, maybe Boston, they all have the same exposure, and doing it manually, you'll be able to pull the condition builder here, and it will automatically find those results for you. So next, after we've set what conditions and who it's going to impact, we'll actually go to our measurements table here. Now, these measurements can be manually input by your industrial hygiene team, or you can actually build out an integration. So if you have any wearables or any measurement tools that maybe your organization is using, and if they have an open API, you would be able to build out that integration during implementation. So if you did want an automatic feed of those measurements, some customers that we talk to have, measurements coming in daily, every hour, and then others are testing maybe once a month. So it depends on your organization, but there is quite a bit of flexibility in here. If we open up our measurement here, you can date and time stamp it. And then what it's going to do is, because if we think back to what type of, actually go back to our record here, what type of exposure category we're looking at, the example of noise, it's going to default that measurement unit. So it's saying that dBA or decibels is our measurement unit for noise. If you wanted to change that, you can absolutely configure it. And the reason it's a drop down here is some measurements have different units. So for example, temperature has both Celsius and Fahrenheit, depending on where in the world. If you're in America, you're probably going to be putting Fahrenheit in here. So you are able to choose that it's decibels. You can put in your measurement here. So we're going to say that it's maybe 110. And OSHA, I think, classifies that as the volume of a club. So it's going to be quite loud. And then you can also input your time weighted average. So we'll just say 8 here. You can save a description as well, and we'll save this into our measurement table. You also can identify any exposure sources here. So if it's coming from a hazard, the safety register, a machine, really for any reporting functionality is, where is this noise coming from? We can say it's just coming from maybe the printer. It is a very loud printer here. And you can save that and associate it with your measurement information. So we'll go back here, we'll refresh our list, and actually refresh our page here to get another exposure in. And what it's going to do is run a scheduled job in the background, and it will automatically create those exposures. So we'll take a look at this one here. And based on the set number that you've put in, so now it's greater than 90, which was our set number. We put in 110, we have our exposure here. And also based on the conditions of employees that we set, we had one affected person, Eileen, it's going to automatically generate that exposure. So you're not going to have to come in and say, okay, I see a measurement here, now I need to create the exposure. It's going to automatically generate that for you. And with here, we can see the exposure details. If we wanted to have a level on it, if we needed to end date it, say, for example, the exposure no longer is an exposure at your organization, perhaps you did a control of elimination and you removed, maybe, for example, for a chemical, you remove the chemical and they're no longer working with it, you can actually end date it and change it to obsolete. And next, on our exposure details, you can add any control measures. So these are going to pull from the control register that's within our configuration area here. So if you do need more information on that, we do have a full blog in February of 2024 about this, as well as docs. But essentially, these are going to be your controls that are going to be mitigating, the impact of exposures on employees' health. And next, if we look at a related list here, you'll be able to see our user, who's Eileen. She was our active user in the table, and she's going to have her own unique exposure record here. So if you look, they all have different prefixes to their numbers here. So this gives a good understanding of where you're at, within that hierarchy of exposure. But Eileen here has her own exposure, so you'll be able to report on that from an individual user perspective to see that Eileen does have an exposure impacting her. If we go back to our exposure assessment here, some other things to call out is our documents table. And these are any types of documents. I don't have any within this instance, but they're going to be within the configuration area as well. So these could be links out to policies. They could be to your internal policies if you're using Knowledge. They could be any type of attachments. There is quite a bit of functionality within that documents table, and you can associate them here to our exposure assessments. Finally, we can look at our action schedule. And within our action schedule, I have one built here. This is actually going to be a schedule of health and safety actions. So if you're familiar with the concept of health and safety actions, those can be any health and safety action across the organization. So it can be assigned to anyone within the organization. Perhaps you need to assign someone on the HR team a task, or someone within facilities or IT. It is not limited to just the scope of health and safety. It is anyone in the organization, and they can be corrective, preventative learning. So if you actually have an integration with an LMS tool, you can integrate those learning tasks in, as well as tasks. So maybe you don't want to classify it as corrective or preventative. You just need to action out someone. You can have a task, health and safety action. So we have our corrective action here. From our action, what this is doing is setting up a schedule. So you can choose the priority, the location, if this is active still, and how many days to complete after the action is created. So today is the 13th, so it will effective date it within 10 days to complete this. And you'll be able to report on those as well if they're overdue. And then also we have our reoccurring action here. So if this is something that needs to be done daily, yearly, monthly, perhaps you need your employees to do a hearing test every single year. And instead of going back into this exposure to say, okay, it's a year later, now I need to manually assign out these employees that have been impacted, this will automatically run and schedule those actions. So once we save this, we'll just save it. It will create a new action here, and it's going to be assigning to Eileen because she is our user that has been determined to have that exposure. Again, based on the conditions builder that we had set, we know that Eileen is our employee that has been exposed and needs to do a hearing test. Now, this list will look a lot larger depending on how many employees you have in this. So if you have hundreds or thousands of employees that need to be in this list, it will generate and it will give every single one of those employees a hearing test action here. And then we can see our due date. So when this is due, the time that it's due, so you'll be able to report on overdue actions. You'll be able to have complete visibility into has the employee completed this action, when they completed it, quite a bit of information on that. Now, Eileen here is going to receive this action within Employee Center. And so within My Task, she'll see, and we can actually go into Employee Center, show you Eileen's point of view. And what she'll be able to do is see this action here in order to complete that action. Eileen also can see this on her mobile phone as well. So if she's not a desk worker, we're sitting at our desk today looking at this, but she also can receive it on her mobile phone as well as email. So if you wanted to configure email notifications to Eileen to let her know that she needs to do her hearing test. Now, this is just one example. If you needed to add out additional information to this action as well to give more context, you would be able to do that and they can complete that action. So this is where you'll be able to monitor those exposures, the assessments, as well as take either corrective or preventative action for employees. So we'll now go back to our slide deck here, and we'll cover our next topic of meeting management. So this is going to be a multi-release investment from our product team. And the goal of this is to easily track safety meetings for required record keeping. So out of the box, we deliver different types of safety meetings. So things like safety committee meetings, as well as toolbox talks or, first aid trainings. And within it, you'll be able to assign to a host, and that host can track attendees as well as absentees. It also, within this record, you'll be able to create, a historical record of the meeting, so you can document agendas, meeting notes, attachments. And so for auditing purposes, if you're having an audit on your health and safety team and you need to pull all the meetings, when the meetings were, who attended the meetings, and what was said, you'll be able to easily pull this information and share information about your meetings. This is, again, going to be a multi-release investment. So we'll have our next iteration of meeting management in May. So if you're very excited about meeting management, stay up to date with our releases, and you'll be seeing more in our May release. All right, our final topic that I wanted to cover today was our establishment total hours. And this is going to be a flexible framework for enabling total hours for an establishment to be broken down into different periods for the year to give more granularity in reporting. And I'm actually going to switch to the demo instance again to show what I mean by this. So we're logged into our health and safety workspace here. And oh, you know what? We need to make sure that we're logged in as our system admin because we impersonated someone. So it's just showing that our roles are working here because we were impersonating Eileen. So we'll just log back in so that we can see our health and safety incident management. And we'll go back to our health and safety workspace here. So we're looking at our health and safety workspace again. And within incident management, you'll be able to track your establishment information. Now, this is used for OSHA reporting, but you can use these tables for other regulatory reporting if you wish. And we'll just give it a second to load. All right, so we're looking at our establishment records here. And you'll be able to build out as many establishment records as you need to match your establishment. So we'll go into this one here that's already been created. And what we did actually in our November release was we made this a reference to the WSD location tables. So if you did need to report on these are all reference fields now, and they'll pre-populate these fields if you choose a specific location that has all this information in that. Now, what we did in February was, now if we go to our annual information, say for 2024, you'll be able to add periodic total hours worked. So we can add as many periodic total hours work as needed for the year. And if we add a new one here, for example, because it's based on these date ranges, you'll be able to choose when this occurred. Now we'll go back to 2024 and let's go to May. We'll do May 1st to May 4th, 24. We'll say May 13th, why not? You'll be able to set those dates. So it could be a month, it could just be a week, it could be a single day. It doesn't matter. You would determine what that period would be. And then you can add the total hours worked. So let's just say 1 hour was worked, very unrealistic, but we'll just say 1 hour has been worked. What it's going to do here now for your 2024 time is it's going to modify that value. So we're logged in as admin right now for the purpose of the demo, but we do have specific roles that can edit and add these hours worked outside of admin here. So that is everything I wanted to share about our February release. If you have any questions, again, put them in the chat and we'll go through, or the Q&A, we'll go through them now. And if you want to learn more about our January release, a lot more in depth, we are publishing a community blog this week. So it's going to be on our health and safety community page, as well as our docs pages. So those will have the release notes as well as detailed information about our January release. So at this point, we will look and see if there are any questions from our group here. And I will open chat and I'll see if there are any questions. So if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, but no pressure. I have some frequently asked questions here. So we'll go through some of these frequently asked questions. If you're still thinking of your questions or typing. So the first question is, can the conditions for when an exposure is determined, so within that condition builder, be edited as regulations change? So if OSHA tomorrow says that the acceptable noise level and total or time weighted average has changed, can we go in and edit them? Absolutely, you will be able to edit those condition builders and you'll be able to do it very easily and within your industrial hygiene role that we have. So the reason we did that is because we don't want you, maybe to have to go through, a development team or a partner to change those. We want you to be to easily change those as those regulations change, so you're compliant, and you can keep those up to date. The next question we have is, can you configure permit to work requests? And Shayna covered this really well, but absolutely. So within record producers, you'll be able to configure the permit request. So you can configure the types, you can configure the fields that are available. They are dynamic. So you'll be able to configure that to match your permit to work process. And then you can also configure those checklists. Now I see Anne-Marie put in a question, so let's take a look at that. And I think Jordan, you answered it with the Now mobile app. Let me double check. Yes. So our applications as a whole are all going to be available on the Now mobile app. So for those workers that are not desk workers, they can access things like permit to work, they can access incident on their mobile phones. And then we also have our agent app. So some of our health and safety functionality is available on agent as well as offline. The next question I have here is, when is the next release for meeting management? And that is going to be in May. So again, our release webinar, we'll have one in May. So if you want to learn more about that, tune into that session. And then our final question here, that is a frequently asked question, is, can you associate risk assessments to exposure management? I know a lot of times organizations will do a risk assessment, an exposure assessment, and then maybe a JSA. Absolutely, you can associate them. They're all part of the same product. And so if you wanted to associate multiple tables, you absolutely could do that. And then let's see, we have a few more questions come in. Yes, Anne-Marie, if you send us an email too, we can also set up a dedicated call with you to do that demo, and we can also send over some screenshots if that might be helpful. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining our What's New webinar. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us on our webinar today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, I'm Claire Russell, and thank you, Shayna and Jordan, for joining our session today. Have a good day, everyone.